Hello. So we are continuing to work our way through the Sermon on the Mount together. And we've done the Beatitudes, and last week I covered the first part of the salt and light section. Many times the verses on salt and light get looked at straight away. They get looked at in one lump, salt and light together. And that's because we are called to be salt and light. So it is easier to obviously talk about them both together. But salt and light have two different purposes. And so actually to lump them together without greater consideration often leads us to miss the nuances of these verses. To be salt means to preserve the goodness, to be an agent of the goodness of God in this world. But to be a light means to shine, to burn brightly, to be seen and be heard for God and his kingdom. Preserving the goodness of God in this world can go seen and can go unseen. But it should always be done whether it's seen or not. Being a light is all about what we do when we are seen. Jesus even says if a light is hidden under a bowl, it's unseen. So what Jesus is saying here is that we need to live lives that live those lives by what we do, by how we act, how we react, what we say. That we need to do all those things in a way that shines His light, shines out the kingdom of God in those public spaces. One of the major focuses for the last 20 years in Christian books have been all about how do we build our relationships with God. They've been like the bestsellers at Wesley Owen and St Andrew's Bookshop and all of those places, and the Good Book Company. How do I build and develop my relationship with God further? A lot of them have been devotionals that help you to do that as well, and they're all been the big bestsellers. It seems to be a bit of the trend of the last 20 years. And a lot of these books I've loved, I've read, I've loved, and I've even recommended to some of you. And a lot of them focus mainly on the private, our secret spaces with God. Those private spaces, those private times, and how do we develop those? And please hear me, we must cultivate our relationship with God behind closed doors in our private spaces. We must be a people that does that. That is where our true intimacy with God can be fully developed. However, what happens is that when the messages around us are cultivated and saturated in one direction, we often forget the other. And whilst our private spaces for God and our private lives for God are really important, this shouldn't be at the expense of being a light for Christ and for the kingdom of God in our public spaces. A light under a bowl does nothing for the world around it. But it's amazing if you're under the bowl. It could be possible for us to have this amazing relationship with God that feels so bright and so full, but really it's just you and God under a bowl. And of course, if you're in that bowl and under that bowl, you're going to think that everything is good. Why? Because you are surrounded by light. It's reflecting back off the bowl towards yourself. But what about the world outside of the bowl? I love my morning times with God and reading my Bible and praying with Him. Sometimes I get challenged on something really personal, and sometimes I just simply draw closer to God. But I also carry an expectation that wherever I have grown, whatever I've grown in that morning, whatever I've read, whatever I've heard, might not just be for me. That actually it might be for someone who I am seeing that day or speaking to that day. And more often than not, I end up sharing with somebody I'm seeing that day what I ended up spending my private time with God on. Why? Because I believe how God is shaping me in the private space. He's shaping me in that space so I can shine brighter for Him in the public space. Why don't you do a little activity now? If you're alone, do it alone. If you're with someone, do it with them. Or if you're with your life group, do it with them. First of all, I want you to create two lists. The first list, write a list of the spaces where you are normally intentional about God in your week. Now write another list. right on that second list where all the public spaces you are during your normal week. Are you just as intentional about God in that public list as you are in the first one? Because actually, that's what Jesus is saying here. He's saying all those places that you've listed in the public space is where you need to shine for Him, where you need to be intentional for Him. Are you just as intentional about God in those public spaces as you are in the first list? And if you are, brilliant. Be encouraged. You're doing exactly what Jesus is calling you to. But if not, why don't you take the time now to go to God in prayer and pray and talk with whoever you're with over these public spaces. Pray for them, talk about them, and make a conscious decision to be intentional for the kingdom of God in these spaces. Come out from under the bowl. What can you do in these public spaces to be more intentional in shining the light of God? I say, if you don't know, have a pray. God will lead you to how you do that. How are you going to shine for God in these public spaces? That's where the light of Christ needs to be seen. The challenge is, will we shine?